Okay, this is the Utilitech Pro. It comes from Lowe's, obviously a very significant retailer in America. That's primarily why it's interesting, because I'm sure it's widely available. It is a 60 watt equivalency dimmable unit. It comes from Feit Electric, actually, presumably actually the manufacturer of it. We will, as always, analyze it and then tear it apart. Okay, light patterns or light distribution. The box is actually nice in this product. It shows there's a light distribution. It says directional, which is also actually another honest thing to say, because this bulb isn't a super emulation of the old A-shaped bulb. It's actually a fairly downward firing polar graph. The greater the distance from the center to the curve, of course, indicates a greater light output. Bulb positioned like this. You can see mostly firing downwards with not too many side lobes. Now, that's a problem in the sense that this bulb won't fit into every fixture and emulate exactly like an old 60 watt incandescent. It'll do better in some fixtures than others. For example, this bulb probably would work really well in a lamp like this, which is primarily firing downwards. Okay, dimmability. Not super excellent in terms of low end. It has this sort of behavior. It just snaps on relatively bright. And then, of course, it is dimmable to some degree. So certainly bulbs have gotten better than this bulb, especially, say, some of the more recent Philips bulbs. Okay, flicker performance. Obviously the bulb here, a little bright, causes the camera a bit of distress. Over here is a solar cell which converts, of course, light to electricity, and an oscilloscope probe connected to it, and that, of course, results in a waveform being drawn out by the oscilloscope. And, of course, you can see it's fairly significant height and classic 120 hertz. So this bulb is sort of one of those unremarkable bulbs where there is fairly significant flicker on it. Okay, well, this bulb's sort of looking like one that I turned down previously under the Feit brand name. It had the same physical shape. The one difference is I think that the light pattern is slightly more directional, so I suspect under the hood here we'll find a slightly different either diffuser dome or emitter array. Okay, dome removed, of course, and not a big surprise, a planar array of LEDs. Probably that's why it's getting such a directional downlight. Now, as I mentioned, I actually had torn down a Feit light previous to that, and there's a dome, and there's the emitter array from that. Now, this other Feit actually had a slightly better pattern, a little more representative of an incandescent light bulb. And I distinctly remember its packaging saying that was had better light distribution. So you can see they made the dome larger, and there's some subtle changes on the patterns of the LEDs. And surprisingly, it creates a fairly significantly different light pattern. So if you're interested in under the same YouTube channel, there's a Feit review of a bulb a few months ago. So interesting. Okay, let's keep on going through the heatsink. Okay, go a bit further now. You can see the emitter array. It's been bonded to a fairly significant heatsink, actually. You can see there's a considerable amount of surface area on the heatsink, which is good design. That'll allow the heat from these LEDs to be drawn out and quite efficiently dissipated to the air. Stronger than some bulbs I've seen. Now, one weakness, I guess, of this design, though, is like a cartridge, the power system slides into the heatsink, and obviously there's an air gap there. So the electronics here, I would speculate, would be fairly isolated thermally, which is resulting in them getting a little bit hotter than perhaps desired. The potting compound, of course, the gray potting compound in here, we'll see an AC to DC converter. Okay, obviously an AC to DC converter. On the left-hand side, the AC input, and then, of course, the black and red leads here going off to the LED emitter array. Let's see. You can see all interesting industrial archaeology when you open up a circuit board. This is the smoothing capacitor. It's an electrolytic, relatively short life when they run pretty hot. And they have ratings for their operating temperatures. Higher the rating, usually the longer the life. 105 degrees centigrade certainly is at the very bottom range of the capacitors that I've seen in drives that I've torn down. Controller topology, it's based on an NXP part. Here, let's pop up the data sheet. We've seen this one before. It was used on the other Feit as well, although this circuit board actually is a little bit different. You start to see some sort of questionable soldering quality things. You can see that there's two components here. There's a trace, but you can see there's just a huge blob of solder. We consider that a really strong bit of process. You can see a little bubble here. That's when the air blew out and created a void as the solder heated up. It blew out some entrained air and obviously caused a ugly looking solder joint. there's a bit of control here. The vendor actually can silkscreen a board. That seems to be variable text at the time of manufacture. Over here, we'll find a code, UL coded database code. You can type this in and actually find out the vendor. This is the name of the vendor for this board. Not the assembly, just the raw circuit board. So interesting. It's a fairly complicated topology. You can see that there's a inductor here. There's of course the controller here. And the controller data sheet talks about having integrated MOSFET. Yep, you can clearly see on this design they've had to do a little daughter card with what looks like a MOSFET and a few other parts. So relatively expensive approach. A fuse, and choke, and a capacitor. These are for EMI protection, and otherwise relatively unremarkable. Okay, well, let's tally the score on this one. Light pattern wasn't very good. It was actually not a good emulation of a light bulb, but the packaging was very clear that that was not the case. It was going to be a directional bulb. So, definitely pleased to actually see this in packaging. It's a real guessing game these days as when you buy an LED bulb. So, we'll actually give the bulb a point here for being honest as to what you're buying. Flicker, bulb flickers, so I'll take a point away from that. I don't care for bulbs that flicker, so nothing I'm not keen on. Assembly quality, low quality capacitor here, 105 degrees centigrade rating. I'll take a point away from that. There's some soldering, questionable soldering on the board. Take a point away from that. It's so unnecessary. Just a few more pennies on this assembly here could dramatically increase the life of it. You know, this all becomes landfill eventually. So, unfortunately, society very much favors low service life and low initial costs over long-term costs.